March 14th, 2025, 4:47 a.m., Southern District of New York, Manhattan Federal Courthouse, Foley Square. The streets are empty. Fog rolls off the East River. The city is silent. Most of Manhattan is still asleep. But above the federal courthouse, thermal imaging drones are circling. FBI tactical units are positioned on every corner. DEA agents in unmarked vehicles line Pearl Street and Worth Street. ICE Homeland Security investigations teams have locked down the Brooklyn Bridge and Manhattan Bridge entry points. U.S. Marshals have sealed every exit from the building. This is not a drill. At exactly 5:02 a.m., federal agents enter the Southern District Courthouse. Through service entrances, side doors, and underground tunnels, they move in silence. No sirens, no flashing lights, no media presence. By 5:47 a.m., 198 individuals are in federal custody: judges, court clerks, bailiffs, legal assistants, paralegals, attorneys, document processors, IT administrators, security personnel. They are handcuffed. They are read their rights. They are loaded into unmarked federal transport vehicles and taken to undisclosed detention facilities in New Jersey, Connecticut, and upstate New York. The operation is called Operation Blind Justice. It is the largest single-day arrest of judicial personnel in United States history, and it reveals something far more dangerous than anyone expected. This was not a typical raid. The American public has seen drug busts before: warehouse raids in Los Angeles, border seizures in El Paso, tunnel discoveries in San Diego, cartel safe houses in Phoenix, fentanyl labs in Oakland. But this was different. This was not a cartel cell operating in the shadows. This was not a street gang moving weight through nightclubs and trap houses. This was not a smuggling ring working out of cargo ports. This was the federal court system itself. The Southern District of New York is one of the most powerful judicial districts in the country. It prosecutes terrorism cases. It handles financial crimes. It oversees organized crime cases. It processes immigration appeals. It adjudicates federal drug cases. It is supposed to be untouchable. But for over 8 years, a criminal network had been operating inside the courthouse walls. Judges were taking bribes. Court staff were altering case files. Bailiffs were smuggling documents. IT administrators were deleting electronic records. Legal clerks were feeding case details to cartel attorneys, and the scope was massive. Between 2017 and 2025, more than 4,200 federal drug cases were compromised. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses were intimidated. Defendants walked free. Informants were exposed. DEA operations were leaked. Border interdiction schedules were sold. Undercover agents were identified. The network was not just protecting drug traffickers, it was actively enabling them, and it had been invisible for nearly a decade. The invisible system. The cartel learned a long time ago that the most effective weapon is not violence. It is invisibility. You do not need to shoot your way out of prison if the judge dismisses the charges. You do not need to bribe a jury if the evidence never makes it to trial. You do not need to threaten a prosecutor if the prosecutor never receives the case file. The New York operation was built on a simple principle: control the system, and you control the outcome. It started small. In 2017, a court clerk in the Southern District was approached by a cartel representative. The clerk was offered $15,000 in cash to delay a single case file by 2 weeks. The clerk accepted. The delay allowed a defendant to post bail and disappear before trial. The cartel took note. Within 6 months, the same clerk was being paid $5,000 per month to provide advance notice of sealed indictments. The cartel used that information to move defendants out of the country before arrest warrants were executed. By 2018, the network had expanded. A paralegal in the U.S. Attorney's Office was recruited. She had access to witness lists. She sold names and addresses for $2,000 per witness. Over the next 2 years, 11 federal witnesses were killed or intimidated into silence. a bailiff was recruited. He provided cartel attorneys with live updates during closed-door grand jury sessions. He was paid $10,000 per session. An IT administrator was recruited. He deleted digital evidence from case management systems. He altered metadata on electronic filings. He removed body camera footage from evidence servers. He was paid $50,000 per month. And then the network reached the bench. In 2019, a federal magistrate judge was compromised. The judge had presided over drug cases for 12 years. He had a reputation for fairness. He had ruled against cartel defendants dozens of times. He seemed incorruptible. But the cartel did not approach him with money. They approached him with leverage. The judge had a gambling problem. He owed $340,000 to illegal sports betting syndicates in Atlantic City. The syndicates were cartel-controlled. The cartel offered to erase the debt in exchange for cooperation. The judge agreed. Over the next 5 years, that judge dismissed 87 federal drug cases. He suppressed evidence in 134 cases. He denied prosecution motions in 216 cases. He granted bail to 342 defendants who were classified as flight risks. He did it quietly. He did it legally. He wrote judicial opinions that cited case law and constitutional precedent. His rulings were reviewed by appellate courts and upheld. No one suspected corruption because the corruption was invisible. By 2022, the network included 19 federal employees. By 2024, it included 47. By early 2025, the number had reached 198. They operated in plain sight. They attended court hearings. They processed documents. They filed motions. They conducted background checks. They administered oaths. They served the public, and they served the cartel. Scale and consequences. The human cost of this operation cannot be measured in arrests alone. Between 2017 and 2025, approximately 1,140 kilograms of fentanyl entered the United States through distribution networks linked to cases compromised by the New York judicial corruption ring. 1,140 kilograms of fentanyl is enough to kill 5.7 billion people. It is enough to kill every person in the United States 17 times over. Most of that fentanyl was distributed in the Northeast: New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. In 2023 alone, fentanyl-related overdose deaths in those states totaled 18,742. In 2024, the number rose to 21,308. Families were destroyed. Children lost parents, parents lost children. Emergency rooms were overwhelmed. Morgues ran out of space. Funeral homes operated at capacity, and the judicial system that was supposed to stop this had been weaponized to enable it. The cartel did not just traffic drugs, they trafficked impunity. Every case that was dismissed meant a dealer stayed on the street. Every piece of suppressed evidence meant a kingpin walked free. Every compromised witness meant a distributor avoided justice. The ripple effect was catastrophic. In 2022, a cartel enforcer named Hector Villarreal was arrested in Brooklyn on federal charges. He was linked to 7 homicides. He was caught with 14 kilograms of fentanyl and $2.3 million in cash. The evidence was overwhelming. But his case was assigned to a compromised judge. The judge ruled that the search warrant was improperly executed. The evidence was suppressed. The charges were dismissed. Villarreal was released. 3 months later, Villarreal was linked to 4 additional murders in Newark. In 2023, a distribution cell operating out of Queens was dismantled by DEA agents. 18 individuals were arrested. The cell was responsible for moving 300 kilograms of cocaine and 40 kilograms of fentanyl per month into the tri-state area. But a court clerk leaked the arrest affidavits to cartel attorneys. The cartel moved the leadership structure out of the country before federal agents could execute arrest warrants. Only low-level couriers were prosecuted. The cell rebuilt and resumed operations within 6 months. In 2024, a confidential informant provided DEA agents with the location of a cartel safe house in the Bronx. The safe house contained financial records, communications logs, and distribution ledgers. But the magistrate judge denied the search warrant. The cartel was tipped off. The safe house was emptied. The evidence was destroyed. The informant was found dead 2 weeks later. These are not isolated incidents. These are consequences, and they repeated over and over for 8 years. War-level federal response. The FBI became aware of the network in late 2022. A sealed indictment in a separate case revealed an anomaly. A defendant had received advance notice of his arrest. He had fled the country 48 hours before the warrant was executed. The leak had to have come from inside the courthouse. The FBI opened an internal investigation. It was classified top secret. Only 12 agents knew about it. They operated under a compartmented task force designation. They reported directly to FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. The investigation moved slowly. They could not risk alerting the network. They could not use traditional surveillance methods. If the cartel had access to court systems, they likely had access to law enforcement databases. So the FBI went analog. They used physical surveillance. They tailed court employees. They photographed meetings. They tracked cash deposits. They monitored offshore bank accounts. They cross-referenced financial records with case outcomes. And they found patterns. Certain judges consistently ruled in favor of cartel defendants. Certain clerks delayed cases involving cartel leadership. Certain IT administrators experienced system glitches that coincided with evidence suppression motions. By mid-2023, the FBI had identified 14 compromised employees. By early 2024, the number had grown to 62. By December 2024, the FBI had compiled a list of 198 individuals. They handed the evidence to the Department of Justice. On February 11, 2025, the Attorney General authorized Operation Blind Justice. The operation involved 847 federal agents, FBI, DEA, ICE Homeland Security Investigations, U.S. Marshals Service, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Military Counterintelligence Units. The operational security was unprecedented. No electronic communications, no digital case files, no shared databases. Everything was paper. Everything was compartmentalized. Every agent was vetted. Every briefing was conducted in a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility. The raid plan was military grade. Tactical teams were assigned to specific targets. Arrest warrants were pre-signed. Transport vehicles were staged. Detention facilities were prepared. Media blackout protocols were implemented. On the night of March 13, 2025, federal agents moved into position. At 4:47 a.m. on March 14th, they executed 198 arrests, 0 casualties, 0 escapes. By 9 a.m., the Attorney General held a press conference. He confirmed the arrests. He confirmed the charges. He confirmed the scale: conspiracy to obstruct justice, bribery of public officials, drug trafficking facilitation, racketeering, wire fraud, money laundering, witness tampering, evidence tampering. Sentences range from 10 years to life. The Attorney General did not take questions. He simply ended the briefing with a single statement: the rule of law has been restored. The aftermath. But the damage had already been done. Within hours of the press conference, the legal community went into crisis mode. Defense attorneys filed emergency motions in hundreds of cases. If judges were corrupt, were the convictions valid? If evidence was tampered with, were the trials fair? If witnesses were intimidated, were the verdicts legitimate? Appellate courts were flooded. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals issued a blanket stay on all sentencing hearings in drug-related cases pending review. The Department of Justice created a special task force to audit every case handled by the 198 arrested employees. The review identified 4,237 cases that required re-examination. Of those, 1,683 cases were overturned or dismissed. 1,683 convicted drug traffickers walked out of federal prison, not because they were innocent, because the system that convicted them was corrupt. And under U.S. law, a conviction obtained through judicial corruption is not valid. The cartel did not just compromise the court system, they weaponized it. Even in defeat, they won. The public reaction was immediate. Trust in the federal judiciary collapsed. Polling conducted by Pew Research in late March 2025 showed that 68% of Americans no longer believed the court system was impartial. 73% believed corruption was widespread in federal law enforcement. 81% believed that cartels had infiltrated government institutions. Prosecutors resigned. Judges requested transfers. Court staff quit. And the cartel network adapted. Within 2 months, federal investigators identified similar corruption schemes in the Eastern District of New York, the District of New Jersey, and the Southern District of Florida. The model had been replicated. The invisible system was not unique to Manhattan. It was a blueprint. The warning. This is not a story about criminals. This is a story about camouflage. The cartels do not look like cartels anymore. They do not wear masks. They do not carry guns. They do not operate in the dark. They wear suits. They carry briefcases. They work in office buildings. They have law degrees. They have government clearances. They have badges. They look like public servants. And that is the point. The modern cartel does not fight the system. It infiltrates it. It does not challenge the law. It becomes the law. It does not fear enforcement. It controls enforcement, and it does so quietly. There were no shootouts at the courthouse, no hostages, no explosions, no dramatic standoffs, just paperwork, just signatures, just silence. And that silence was more dangerous than any weapon. Because when the danger looks normal, people stop looking for it. When corruption wears a suit and carries a gavel, it becomes invisible. When the threat works inside the system, it becomes the system. And that is when societies fall. Not with violence, with paperwork. The 198 individuals arrested in Operation Blind Justice were not anomalies. They were not rare exceptions. They were proof of a larger problem. They were proof that the cartels have evolved faster than the institutions built to stop them. They were proof that trust is no longer a defense, and they were proof that the battlefield has moved. It is no longer at the border. It is no longer in the streets. It is no longer in the warehouses or the safe houses or the tunnels. It is in the courtroom. It is in the law firm. It is in the office building. It is in the institution you trust, and unless the public understands that, the next breach will be worse. Because the cartel is patient. They do not need to win today. They just need to stay invisible long enough to win tomorrow. The reckoning operation. Blind justice was not the end of the threat. It was the exposure of it. The arrests sent a message to every cartel operative embedded in the system. You are not untouchable. But it also sent a message to the American public. You were not safe. You thought the courthouse was secure. It was not. You thought the judge was impartial. They were not. You thought the system worked. It did not. For 8 years, the most powerful judicial district in the country was compromised. For 8 years, justice was for sale. For 8 years, the people who were supposed to enforce the law were breaking it. And no one noticed. Not the media. Not the public. Not the oversight committees. Not the inspector generals. Because the corruption was invisible. It was hidden in plain sight. It was disguised as bureaucracy. It was camouflaged as legal process. And that is the most dangerous type of corruption, because it does not announce itself. It does not draw attention. It does not create victims who can testify. It simply erodes the system from within, quietly, until the system stops functioning. And by the time anyone notices, it is too late. That is what happened in New York. And it is happening in other cities right now. The FBI has identified active judicial corruption networks in at least 7 additional federal districts. The investigations are ongoing. The arrests have not been made public, but they will be. Because this is not an isolated problem. This is a national security crisis, and it requires a national response. The cost of silence. There is a reason the cartels target the judiciary, because the judiciary is the last line of defense. If a dealer is arrested, the court can convict them. If evidence is seized, the court can admit it. If a witness testifies, the court can protect them. But if the court is compromised, none of that matters. The arrest means nothing. The evidence is suppressed, the witness is exposed, and the dealer walks free. That is why the 198 arrests in New York were so significant, because they did not just remove corrupt individuals. They exposed a strategy that treats the legal system not as an obstacle, but as a tool. A strategy that understands that you do not need to destroy the system if you can control it. And a strategy that relies on one thing above all else: public ignorance. Because as long as the public believes the system is working, the corruption can continue. As long as people trust the judge, the clerk, the bailiff, the attorney, the corruption remains invisible. And as long as the corruption remains invisible, it is unstoppable. That is why awareness matters. Not paranoia, not hysteria, not conspiracy. Awareness. The understanding that modern threats do not look threatening. The understanding that the most dangerous enemy is the one you do not see. The understanding that the cartel is not just a criminal organization, it is an intelligence operation, and it is winning. The final warning. This script is not designed to scare you. It is designed to wake you up, because the threat is real. The 198 individuals arrested in Manhattan were real. The cases they compromised were real. The deaths that resulted were real, and the networks that still exist are real. The cartel has learned that violence is expensive. Corruption is cheap. A bullet draws attention, a bribe does not. A shootout makes headlines. A dismissed case does not. A dead body creates outrage. A suppressed evidence file does not. And that is why the cartel is winning. Because they have made the battlefield invisible. They have turned the courtroom into a weapon. They have turned the law into a shield. They have turned public servants into assets. And they have done it so quietly that most people do not even know it is happening. But you know now. You know that the system can be compromised. You know that the institutions you trust can be infiltrated. You know that the people who are supposed to protect you can be bought. And that knowledge is your defense. Because awareness is the first step to accountability. And accountability is the first step to change. So pay attention. Watch the cases that get dismissed. Watch the evidence that gets suppressed. Watch the defendants who walk free, ask questions, demand transparency, hold the system accountable. Because if you do not, the cartel will. And they will use that system to destroy the country from within. One courtroom at a time. One case at a time. One corrupted official at a time. Until there is nothing left to defend. This is not entertainment. This is a warning. The war is no longer at the border. It is inside the institutions you trust. And unless you recognize that, the next breach will not be stopped. It will be normalized. And that is when we lose. Not with violence, with silence. End of report. Operation Blind Justice. March 14th, 2025, 198 arrested. 4,037 cases compromised. 8 years of corruption exposed. The system was broken. But it is not beyond repair. Stay aware, stay vigilant, stay informed. Because the next fight begins now. If this investigation opened your eyes, share it. If it raised questions, ask them. If it made you think, act on it. The institutions that protect you are only as strong as the public that holds them accountable. Do not be silent, because silence is what the cartel needs to win.